Roll call.
Mr. Steingart.
Here.
Ms. Vedder. Mr. Ruiz.
Here.
Mrs. Geiger. Mrs. Labuda.
Yeah.
Okay. Eric, how are you?
First day, last Sunday, the Human Rights Commission had its second annual scholarship brunch, which was very successful. And the second thing is that we've been invited to 5 different schools to participate in their anti-bullying program. So like, we're real excited about that.
That is great.
And I just want to mention that Cora and I were there, and that we went over to Sullivan County Community College. We interviewed a student, and we gave a lovely girl a $1,000 scholarship that is has been at Sullivan County Community College, but she's going on to a 4-year school, so it was a win-win for everybody. And Dan was there.
We wanted to hire her. She is on
Isn't she
fire.
dynamite? And the guy that did the speech, did you get a copy of it by any chance? 'Cause okay. Anyway, it was a great afternoon, and thank you for all your efforts, and Dan for doing that.
The $1,000 came from where?
From the scholarship,
Oh,
we
yeah,
raised the
okay.
money. Yeah, yeah. That was all good.
Okay. Great. Okay. Linda?
I have, I was asked to prepare a report regarding the number and nature of the whistleblower complaints. I'll hand that out now. What I did was, because I've only recently taken over as the personnel officer, I went back to those that I was aware of from January 2013.
Wow. I'm glad there's no names on here.
This is generic enough.
The policy requires that you only provide the number and nature of the complaints and the what has been done with respect to those complaints.
Because you want to protect people's, obviously.
Confidentiality.
Thank you.
You have no choice.
Right.
So this is based on the existing report, the existing policy as it stands?
Yes.
Because the part where I find, start to get kind of my, a bit confused, is that if you have one policy, it's like one size fits all kind of thing. I could file a whistleblower complaint,
Well, generally, a whistleblower complaint is you're filing, if you've made a complaint regarding either fraud or an underlying criminal activity and you're seeking protection, if it's somebody who is either a superior or in a position of authority, and you're seeking protection against an unlawful employment action being taken against you.
But I guess the point, let me just see if I'm phrasing the question correctly.
I
So
don't
might
know
need
if
to
you
help me.
qualify under a whistleblower because you are a legislator.
Well, let's take that out of the equation. I'm just saying that I know of one whistleblower complaint that eventually led to a series of arrests. That was under the fraud umbrella.
Well, and
They're innocent until proven guilty, or whatever. But when that definition of fraud is so expansive, it just seems difficult to then isolate fraud from other types of infractions like workplace violence or insubordination or all these other things. It just seems like it's all been lumped into one whistleblower policy. Is my assumption correct or incorrect?
I'm not really sure how to answer that, and I would obviously have to defer to the county attorney regarding his interpretation of what would qualify under the whistleblower policy. It's my understanding, and the way that I view it, is that if an employee, what you want to encourage employees to promote, you want to encourage employees to, if they believe that there's been a violation of the law, that they report that to somebody, and because they're reporting that, they're seeking protection from retaliation. That's the basis for the whistleblower policy. I mean, you can have an employee who contacts the police regarding an alleged crime that's been committed, but they're not necessarily seeking protection from retaliation. These are what's been filed where people seek protection from retaliation.
So
for
that's
making
the
those
common
complaints.
denominator in all, of whether they're in the first column, the second column, or the third column,
They don't wanna be fired for.
Right.
for having spoken up.
Correct.
Okay. So that's the part where, you know, I had sent a list of questions to Sam regarding the whistleblower policy. We had to have our comments in by the 24th, whether this, you know, falls into the current policy or whether it's retroactive.
No, it falls under the current policy, that's the one that we're bound to follow at this point until a new policy is developed and adopted.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I just missed
Thank
that
you.
piece of this. What did you just say? I'm sorry.
I said we're bound to follow the current policy, whistleblower policy, until a new policy is developed and enacted by the
Okay,
legislature.
so we do have that draft policy that Sam gave us, and was 2 weeks.
Well, I have comments from 3 legislators. And this was difficult for Linda, because the way our current policy reads is the board is supposed to be told about the number, and I think the word is
Nature.
nature. And I don't know what nature frankly means in our current policy, because I'm not being facetious.
No, I'm just, it's.
I'm not being facetious.
the
Our
language is-
current policy says there are only 2 bases. There's fraud and there's unlawful. Well, unlawful is a whole universe. If you think about it, it could be state, federal, local laws, it could be very broad. To contrast our current with what was proposed in that area. In the proposed, we said there should be kind of an executive summation of what the complaint was and what's being done about it, so you have more detail than you have in this. Our current policy doesn't provide for it. Our current policy only provides for the number and nature, and nature is such a broad term, I'm not sure what was intended by the board back in
It was 2009, I believe.
2009. I thought, at some point, some of the comments I got were that the board wanted to be more specific than that. That's something the board's gonna have to decide.
Well, currently, the current policy that we have, just like you say, names fraud and unlawful activity. I think it
Those
is.
are the only 2 things it names.
But the draft policy, because I reviewed that several times.
Right, and you
leaves
sent me a
fraud
comment
out.
about that.
Yeah, it
It doesn't
omits
really
fraud.
leave fraud out.
Well, it kind of does.
It doesn't
It's a
because
little sticky.
it uses a broader term than fraud. It uses violation of state, it uses a violation of law, rule, or regulation.
But with all the work and efforts
But
toward
we can put fraud
fraud.
back in there, that's not a
Right,
problem.
okay, that's
Not a problem.
And then replacing it with like mismanagement, and, you know, to kind of like, I know in our current policy, if there's a complaint, it can be handled in-house.
Our current policy doesn't say it all, interestingly enough. Our current policy assumes it will be looked into, but it doesn't have to be looked into. If you read our current policy, there's an assumption that a complaint is gonna be looked into, but that's all it is, it's an assumption. There are no timelines.
Which is a big problem.
I think it's a big problem, but,
There should be a
but
timeframe. It
on
has
the
to
other
be.
hand, if you look at the state policy has no requirement for writing. It's all based on somebody's claim of what they said orally. It doesn't have any requirement for any investigation, and it doesn't have any requirement for a report, whether annually or any other way, to the state legislature or any other overseeing body. So they're all very different. Legislator Vedder asked me to look into, and I'm gonna try to put that on a PowerPoint for next week or next time. I have a draft that I sent only so far today to Legislator Vedder. She asked me to compare the provisions of federal, state, our current and our proposed whistleblower policies. Federal is almost impossible, because there are so many whistleblower statutes. I spent 2 days and counted up to something like 47 of them, and I think they're probably over 50 when you look at all of them, and they're very different. New York State has only 3. It has one for general employers and employees statewide, it's in the labor law. It has one, I'm not sure why, but for the health field. And then it has one for government employees and employers in the civil service law. So that one is very easy to track
And that's the one we should base our policy on.
well, I don't know whether we should or shouldn't, Gene, that's up to you.
Well,
I think
Civil
there's,
service.
I think there are some things in the state law that if you looked at it, you may not want. For example, the biggest one is the state law doesn't require any writing. So you have no record of what somebody said or didn't say. and
I
when they-
understand that, but that's for us to determine.
Yeah, that's for you.
And we can make the law better than the state law.
Absolutely.
And we have no,
Absolutely.
and
And that's
we have a
all-
legal right to do that.
And that's all legislative veteran asked me to do, is to compare them, and then you could decide, you can choose or do it much better or what have you. So the proposed one that's in front of you now is nothing more than something to start with and to chew on, that's all.
I understand.
And I understand Legislator Geiger's point of she wants to make fraud very definitive in the whistleblower
Well,
policy.
otherwise you get into like a situation where if a complaint is over mismanagement, how do you draw the line there between
Yeah,
someone
fraud or
that's,
just mismanagement.
yeah, that somebody has
Absolutely.
papers all over their desk, or maybe it's insubordination and yet it doesn't fit the policy.
Absolutely.
It could be handled in-house instead of going out into.
But those would
Absolutely, you
be,
make
That- those would be contract
those would
grievances.
be handled disciplinary.
Right, that would be
That's
under
the
the
question I was
contract.
trying
One person at a time so we can keep track of
No, I'm
the,
I'm giving you the civil
Yeah.
service law on that. That's
Well, I don't know
covered
how
by
that
contract.
happens.
That's covered by contract.
If you're talking about insubordination or misconduct or mismanagement, you're talking about a formal disciplinary proceeding.
Mhm.
And there are parameters under the civil service law to allow for that. Now, the only question I have is when you're talking about an investigation, is the investigation into the alleged fraud or criminal activity, because that's something that, in my opinion, needs to be referred to the appropriate agency, whether it's the district attorney's office, whether it's the sheriff's department, or whether it's an internal fraud unit. But I believe that the criminal or fraudulent activity needs to be referred to those agencies. It's not for my office to investigate, I don't believe it's for Josh's office to investigate. The question that comes to, under our current policy with Josh and I, is whether or not there has been any retaliation as a result. That's the only thing I think that we should be responsible for.
And I agree with you, because if it's gonna lead to any type of a criminal charge, it would have to go to some type of, either the district attorney or a police agency.
Exactly.
But wouldn't the original
should be an outside
complaint have
police
to
agency.
match
Let's
with
try-
the current
yeah.
policy?
let's try to do it in an organized
Makes
way.
sense.
Cora had her hand up, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Ira. So when I look at the chart, which you know, I appreciate however much time it took for you to put this together. In the third column, what we have starting on the 29th of July is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 claims of retaliation for prior whistleblower. So the question that comes to mind from looking at it this way, and then there were 2 unfounded, underlying fraud, unfounded situations, is how many specific instances have come from specific people? Is this like out of all of these, there's around
Repeat offender,
16?
repeat complaints?
There are a couple of repeat complaints.
Yeah.
The ones where you see in the retaliation column, where that's a claim of a prior retaliation, those would have come out of prior whistleblower complaints for either fraud or unlawful conduct.
Yeah.
But it also seems problematic for the date file. The first one is April 13, and I remember when the former personnel officer was here, I had asked her for a summary, and they're still on here. So, I mean, how long do you keep these investigations going?
Well,
Until they're resolved.
until I guess they're resolved. Unfortunately, I can't speak for the other personnel officer. I was not privy to the report she provided to you. I went back to the ones that I was aware of from January 1st of 2013 to give you what I was aware of. And unfortunately, I may not be aware of all the complaints that have been filed. And there are other individuals that should be filing these types of reports, if in fact there are others that have been filed only with them and not with me. I did reach out to both the county manager and the county attorney to determine if I missed any that they were aware of, and they provided me with information regarding that.
This is the first time we've gotten a report like this, so thanks.
No, we got one, yeah, but it had these same ones on it, on the top, I think there
But-
was 6 or so, but.
Sometimes.
Can we stay in
it's-
order? I
What?
think you're chairing this committee, would you?
I hope I am.
Right, so would you, I think
Yes.
you're recognizing hands and then people are not. I have
Jonathan.
mine on,
Okay.
yes.
Go ahead, Kitty.
All right, I'd like to state, I think that these things need a timeline, first of all. I don't think that they should continue on the books for 3, 4, 5 years. I think they need to be addressed quickly, and after that address, have a short time of investigation, and then a decision needs to be made. I don't think anything should be sitting on the books for over a year, first of all. Second of all, I've been concerned about some things that are claims of retaliation, and I do believe it's very important to have things in writing, for somebody to say in a little vacuum someplace, I was whistleblowing and nobody paid attention to it. I think that is very wrong, and having been very active in union in the past, I do believe unions have separated out the differences between gripes and grievances, and some of these things might be gripes and or grievances and not actually whistleblower, rise to the thing of whistleblower, and I think that's important. So that's another reason for having a timeline, address it and finish it, because if I whistleblew about something 3 years ago, and it's still on the books, and I'm going to now claim retaliation on a new whistleblower because nothing was resolved from there. Nothing said, it was thrown out for lack of evidence, it was thrown out as unfounded. It needs to have a timeline, because then this claim of retaliation could not be used. So I think that's an important piece.
I think you're mixing
First of all,
apples and
let's,
oranges.
Linda did this because that's what the current regulation or law requires. We're working on making the changes, that's the whole point of it, so.
But can I also say something, the piece you're missing, I had a DPW worker that filed a complaint last summer, but what happened was, and he still doesn't have an answer, but what happened was Carolyn was there, she was overwhelmed or whatever it was, then Linda took over, and the guy's still waiting for an answer, but we do have to have a time frame. But the reason why these are still pending is because Linda just took over. So it's been a complicated for Linda because she's just trying to get in there and clean up that office. But you're right, we do have to, it's not gonna go 2-3 years, but there should be a time frame. But that is the reason why some of these are still sitting, because of that situation, which is unique, I think.
Well,
Go ahead.
If I may, there's 2 things. One is, I think we ought to, I think we ought to, I think the board ought to decide whether you want to mandate investigations of these complaints or not. Present policy doesn't mandate it. You, technically, under the present policy, somebody could receive a whistleblower complaint and put it in a drawer and do nothing. It assumes there's going to be an investigation, but it doesn't mandate it. And there should be, I believe, there should be timelines. The one that was proposed to you had definitive timelines in it.
Right.
But remember one thing. None of that's in the state law, and our employees all have the right to use the state law if they want to, even though we have whatever policy you come up with, they will still have the right to use the state law, just so you know.
Well, I think if our policy is stronger than the state policy, they would use our policy.
One would hope so.
I would rather be more definitive
I would
as
too.
opposed to being very vague.
I would too, Chief.
So to get back, first of all, so everybody needs to get back to Sam as far as the comments for next month.
I have 3 now, and I will distribute, the one I distributed this morning is not final draft. What I will distribute, just so you know what's been done, is is a comparison of federal, state, and ours in a number of different ways. And that may help some of you address what you want to look at.
Ours as it exists?
As
or-
it exists and as presently proposed.
Oh, excellent.
So you've got all of those.
Okay.
The federal is not very helpful, however, because they're just so many and they're so different.
3 additions: thumb screws, rack, Iron Maiden. There you
Well,
go.
no, the irony is, the federal goes back a long time, and you know what most of them are? Bounty statutes,
Yes.
I mean,
such as the IRS still has.
Jonathan?
Back to when we originally put this in, it was the first of its kind. And you can overthink this to death. It's a very simple premise. It's
Yeah.
strictly just to protect people from saying something and then being
Retaliated against.
unrealistically retaliated against.
Absolutely.
Sometimes timetables, it's great, there should be a resolution, but follow that through. So I think I see something, I say something, turns out it was a misunderstanding. My supervisor determines that's how you're gonna play. Statute runs out in 6 months and a day, and 6 months and the second day, they start abusing the hell out of me. I complied with my that's why I believe in it. I mean, it's going back a few years, but it was left broad because this is not meant to be used in all these nefarious ways. It's very simple. It's,
Yeah.
hey, we think something's going on, I don't wanna be fired for saying it.
But because.
And that's it, that's all this is, this is getting used inappropriately in certain instances, but that's what this is not, you
That's
can
what the
overthink
policy
this.
has to
But
address.
that's not exactly what it was for, with all due respect, Jonathan. One of the reasons we put it into effect according to the whereases in the resolution originally was because you wanted things like that reported. It was to encourage people to report wrongdoing in government, with the notion that if they did report it, they were gonna be protected from retaliation. So the first part of it is to let management know that there's something that's going on that shouldn't go on. That was the real impetus for it, and we seem to lose that part of it.
Well, I think.
We can debate this
Yeah,
for
that's-
on and on and on. Get comments back to Sam. We ran very late and there's another meeting at 1, so, we're not gonna solve the issues of this list, but you can get your comments to have impact on the next one. So, Monica's not here. The cell phone policy, everybody get a chance to read it?
Yeah, well, now, the question is, we have a policy now, is that correct?
No.
We don't.
No,
Okay. When would we vote on this?
it actually, what has to happen is, Cheryl, it actually came to us from the law department for
Right.
us to look at it, make
Lori,
comments on.
Lori's sitting right
Lori.
there.
Lori, thank you. And we would make our comments, it would be tweaked, now, and then Linda needs to take it back to the
I need to
union
reach out to the union.
for review
Okay.
by the union.
And the only reason I'm asking is, I know we have the cell phones, that they're in.
Yes.
Some of the people in protective services are out there without phones.
Well, I asked about that, I understood that they were not without phones, they have their old phones.
They had older phones.
They have
but
their phones, they haven't
But they
been
were gonna
taken
be
by
I
released
them.
had
the
Randy and
Okay.
staff pick them up as of late last.
Okay, no,
Yeah.
I was,
They're gonna be.
No, no,
okay,
we-
I was concerned about the safety of
I
our
was
employees.
too, I asked the same question,
Okay.
I know, they
They
still
have, at least,
maintain
I don't know
it.
if he's actually physically giving them out, but they're up in Liberty.
Okay, does he have the authority to hand
Yes,
them out?
yes.
He does, okay. That's,
So,
that's,
Do you want
I'm good.
someone to
Thank
to
you.
you? Is that-
I
That
can't
was
definitively
before
answer
the
that, but I know
purpose of getting
Randy,
it out if there was anything.
Okay.
Kathy,
Okay.
purchasing has handed them over to the FS.
Okay.
I told them to hand them
So
over.
have we already started paying on the plan?
Probably.
Okay. The meter's
would
running?
think.
Probably. Like I said, I could check it, but most likely, yes.
Yeah, the meter's running. Let's
So
put it
when do
that
you
way.
want the comments then by?
Right, as soon
I
as
think I
possible.
had sent an email for last Friday, but as soon as possible.
Okay, I have mine.
And just so you know, the real reason is, you can think about it, on the county computer, we control
Right.
the access.
Right,
On the
No, I
cell phone,
know.
you can't.
I understand.
That's the whole reason, is to put.
Well, you just heard my comment, I'm good.
How does the use of a personal cell phone by a county employee affect records keeping or?
Depends on what sites they go on. These are small smartphones, they can go on the internet.
Right, well, we addressed that in the new policy too, that if
Yeah.
you're going to use your own personal phone for county business, that's addressed in there, and you
Yeah.
have to be subject to, if there's gonna be discovery in a lawsuit or something like that, or you have to save the text or the emails that
Right.
you receive. If you're gonna use your phone for county business, now you're gonna be subject to this.
Yeah.
But it also obviously addresses the county phone that's given to you with all these smart capabilities as well.
Okay, any other questions?
If you're smart, you
Okay.
won't use your own phone.
Yes.
So,
That we-
I'm sorry, if we make our comments by next Friday, and then I'll turn it over to Linda the following Monday, if I don't get any comments, is that enough
Yeah.
time frame for everyone?
But,
That's fine.
okay, if people are needing to use these phones,
They're gonna have.
is there a gap between the old plan and the new
There
plan that
really
they've fallen
wasn't, there
through?
really wasn't an old cell phone policy. There was an old.
No, I understand the policy, I'm just asking about whether it's impeding people's work.
No, they
because-
have the phone.
And they're using the
Well,
new phones.
I could say the department has the phones. I'll double check that they've actually been handed out, but they have the phone. They should have the phones if they don't already, like this week. And then there's already phones out there floating in different departments. There are van drivers that go to Albany and Castle Point every day have a county issued cell phone. So there's phones that, it's not just this whole DFS, it's a more global
Right.
issue. There's phones floating in various departments. So, and a lot of what's in here is putting to paper what's already kind of loosely in
Understood.
practice.
Right.
I get that.
So
I'm
it's
just
gonna-
asking if we're paying for a plan that's not being used because of the policies. been
No,
done.
I told purchasing to give them the DFS and to have them hand them out.
Okay.
No, and because once the negotiation with the unions could take some time, so I don't want the phones to have to sit for a period of
Got it.
time
That
while
was
we
it.
negotiate with the
That
unions.
was my question.
Yes.
Alan?
If if you're sitting at your desk and you're a county employee, is there any discussion about, using the voice over IP or as opposed to running up your cell minutes? I mean, it seems to me if you're using the cell phone, you should do it when you're out in the field.
Right, I don't know.
Does the policy
Find
address
out.
it?
That's a
No,
comment you
yeah.
should give to
No,
Lori
it's
when
not.
you send
If
your
you
comments
email-
in.
If you email that to me, I'll.
Email that to
I
me.
have
Put that in
writing.
Do it on your cell phone.
Text it.
Can
There is a-
do I need to write that down?
Good point.
Okay.
There is a
It
reference
is.
on page 2
Yeah,
under
I thought that was
4B1. It generally says that the business use has to be, there's no other means of communication.
Right.
So it infers that
If you're
if you're at your
sitting
desk all day,
desk.
you really probably wouldn't even have a cell phone. But if you're like a nurse that potentially has one that then comes into the office, yeah, there would be a inference in here that you would be using
Put
the
it down,
county.
use the,
Okay, we have one resolution, to appoint Janet.
So, move it.
Second? Discussion?
Who seconded?
John?
I wanted to ask a question. When I look at, I really appreciate all the work that Janet does, and I think she's doing a great job. I'm wondering, the salary seems to be, I'm not sure where it is in that commissioner group of salary. And on the last page, it says something about 92,000. So I'm wondering, how does 92 convert into the 100 and,
Benefits?
Benefits.
okay.
The 92.
The 92 is, it's exactly the same as 2 recent senior management and
Right.
appointments that you've authorized in the past several months.
So the 92 is
Alan.
what she's getting in it.
That's
It's
the
the
actual
salary.
salary.
You want-
Okay,
you
and
want-
the
The additional-
132.
That's just the health
Includes
insurance.
the
benefits.
and
already.
FICA.
Right.
Okay, that's what I was
Hurry up,
trying.
Alan, we have an executive.
And the job description is exactly the same as it was when you held the position, it hasn't changed in terms of duties and
Well, it's
responsibilities?
just the commissioner, it's not the / deputy county manager.
He's actually saving money because Janet's moving into his old position, what's been vacant for a year, but you're not gonna be,
It's a lower salary than I
Right.
was making, it's not necessarily this, it's not that, she's not gonna be named the deputy county manager within this, it's just the commissioner level title.
So the answer to my question is yes, the job description will change.
No, he had 2 jobs.
I kinda had
descriptions as
2
right.
kinda titles.
The
I
job
mean-
description
Not
for
kinda, you did.
commissioner.
We
The
did.
commissioner title is not necessarily changing though.
If I could compare it, then, the former head of Public Works,
Bob Meyer.
right, he had 2 titles, and that's how he got
Yeah,
two different amounts.
he was the
You
solid
had-
waste director and.
Right.
And you had two
Had
titles,
highways.
and now
Didn't
you're
mean to get in
just
your way, I'm
giving
sorry.
her one title.
But the salary is with the split, cause it was what it had been with the two responsibilities?
It's less.
Okay, so
Okay.
I'm getting closer to the answer.
So, yeah, I think it's only the salary associated with the one.
It's
Calling,
less than that.
calling the question, all in favor?
5-0.
Okay, we'll have public comment because we're gonna go into an executive and we're not gonna have any action after that. So, we'll have public comment and then go into executive for possible litigation, so. Any public comment? Okay. Motion to go into executive?
So moved.
Kathy, seconded by
Tell me, that's